everyone to today's webinar, Preventing Violence Against Women, Engaging Men from Culturally and Linguistically Diverse Backgrounds. My name is Annika Joshi and I'm a Senior Research Officer at the Australian Institute of Family Studies. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nations, who are the traditional owners of the lands in Naarm, Melbourne, where I am speaking to you from. I also would like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of country throughout Australia, across the lands many of you will be joining us today, and recognise their continuing connection to lands and waters. We pay our respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and elders past and present. Before we dive in, I would like to just cover off a little bit of housekeeping. There are live captions available for this webinar, so please follow the link in the chat box if you need those. There's some live Q&A at the end, questions hopefully if we get to them, so please do submit your questions via the questions box in the GoToWebinar dashboard. We acknowledge that today we're trying to cover a really big topic. We probably won't get to everything. And for that reason, any questions that we don't get to today, we'll try and address some extra in a recording after today's webinar that you can then watch in about 2 weeks' time. And you'll be notified via AIFs News, or you can find that recording on the AIFs website under the webinar banner. You can also have a look and find some related readings and resources in the handout section of the GoToWebinar control panel. And a short feedback survey will pop up at the end of today's webinar, and we'd really appreciate if you can complete that for us. Before we begin, I'd really like to hold some space and recognise those who have lived experience of violence within their own lives and those that they love. During this webinar, we will be discussing violence against women, family violence, and sexual violence. So please do take care while you're listening, and if you think you would benefit from some extra support, there are some resources available to you in the chat. So now to today's webinar. Engaging boys and men is becoming increasingly recognised as an important part of prevention of violence against women. The National Plan to End Violence Against Women and Children, for example, highlights the importance of working with boys and men on developing positive masculinities. In my recent review of the evidence, I found emerging evidence on what works, including things like frameworks on how to engage boys and men. But most of the research used Western knowledge systems and language to discuss gender-based violence, including the drivers, engagement mechanisms, and the framing used. A major gap in the literature was how to engage men from culturally and linguistically diverse communities in this prevention space, which is why we're here today. Where do we start? What strategies work? What don't work? And what does this work practically look like? So it's now my pleasure to welcome today's panelists, Anu Krishnan, Junbin Lee, and Tarang Chawla. Their full bios are available in the handout section of the GoToWebinar dashboard, and they will have a chance to tell us a little bit about their work shortly. But before we begin, I wanted to highlight a few things that we discussed as a group in preparation for today's webinar. The first one was around acknowledging the limits of using the word CALD. This is a term that is used across the family and child sector. It's a shorthand, but it often pulls together people from diverse backgrounds, identities, cultures, languages, and migration pathways. Using terms like CALD can also create a sense of othering or assume that all CALD communities are vulnerable and marginalized, which is not necessarily the case either. Some ethnic groups are far more racially marginalized than others, and we need to be cognizant of this straight up. Secondly, working with men using violence might look quite different to those who haven't used it. Many of you work in spaces where this line can be blurred, where there might be things like risk factors or early signs or attitudes, but no violence or admission of violence used. For this reason, the principles, examples, and key messages that we'll try and cover will work across this spectrum and applicable to practitioners working in both the prevention as well as early intervention spaces. but we will avoid going into conversations about responding to violence or specific examples from men's behavior change programs, because that is a different kind of conversation. So, enough about me talking. I would really like to bring in our panelists and start to just set the scene around your work. What drew you to this work, and what does engaging men in prevention actually look like based on your work in this space? So I might start with Anu first, if that's all right.
And thank you to AFIS for inviting us to be part of this webinar. I too would like to start by acknowledging that I'm joining you today from the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people, and that sovereignty was never ceded, and this will and always will be Aboriginal land. In answer to your question, Anaga, what drew us to the work, what drew me particularly into the work in prevention, working with culturally and linguistically diverse men? I'm a social worker by background, and for the first probably 15 to 20 years of my career, I worked primarily with victim survivors, both women who had been impacted by violence and in the child protection space, working with families where children were at the receiving end of violence and conflict. At some point, you start wondering whether any of the work you're doing is actually having an impact, because the number of clients keeps on increasing, your caseload keeps increasing, and the ways in which women experience violence keeps evolving, changing, and becoming increasingly more difficult to address. So about 10 years back, I shifted to working with men and started by working in the men's behavior change space, facilitating groups for men who'd used violence. But again, in having discussions with the men, you're trying to get them to change their behavior, which got me thinking whether we can actually stop it, whether we can actually make enough change in community that violence doesn't happen, and over a generation, we actually end violence against women and children in its entirety. This was around the time of the Royal Commission here in Victoria, and primary prevention was a concept that had just come up, and it made so much sense. And looking at that public health response to a problem like violence against women really grabbed my attention, and that's what I've been doing for the last 8 to 10 years. Thank you.
Thanks, Anu. And how about you, Jun? Tell us a little bit about your work in this space.
Thanks, Anaga. Once again, yeah, thanks for inviting us here. My journey started from a leadership course that was run by AIMS, which is the background of Anu. AIMS had this leadership for multicultural communities called Prevention of Violence Against Women leadership course, and I guess I was the second batch, and that was a mind-blowing leadership course. My initial reason for joining it was quite naive. I thought it's just a free course that you can upskill and free food and all that, but then 7-8 weeks later, yeah, it definitely shattered my worldview, and that's how I am interested in doing more work in this space, particularly because I haven't been paying attention most of my life until that leadership course. So I guess something that has a stronger pull for me is, though I was around 30 plus at that time, and then not even paying any attention to that. Instead, I was just focusing too much on my career, my education, my, I guess, relationship and all that instead of this. So long story short, I changed my career path and still trying to learn as we go. And the second question, what does engaging men in prevention look like? I guess for me, there's constant doubt. There's constant asking myself, what's my intention? Are they genuine? What am I trying to do? Am I qualified to ask my friends to look into this space? There's constant, yeah, just self-doubt and learning and unlearning journey for me. That's where I'm at this point.
Thanks, Jun. Tharang, I'll bring you in now. A lot of our audience may be already familiar with your face on screen, but please tell us a little bit about you and what drew you to this space and what kind of work you're working on at the moment.
Sure. Thank you, Aniga. And thank you, Anu and Jun, for your answers as well and giving us a background. to what drew you to this work. I came to this work through family tragedy following the murder of my younger sister, Nikita. At the time, this was 11 and a half years ago that she was murdered. A lot of my work focused on justice system responses, the criminal justice system, and response, and an element of recovery and healing work as well. Another area that's certainly growing, and I know that the Australian Institute of Family Studies focuses on as well. But then, as much like with what Anu was speaking about in relation to men's behaviour change, a lot of that is trying to fix something after some pretty life-altering consequences have already occurred. And so I sort of shifted to then work more around prevention work. And what drew me to the work in the first place was family tragedy, but I stayed in it because I think that men's violence is so much bigger than just family or personal stories. It's social, cultural, and a political problem that we all have an ability collectively to prevent. And what drew me in further was, I think, the gap in how we talk about violence after it happens, and how little we do as a whole of society to interrupt attitudes or systems or norms, things at a structural level that make violence a possibility in the first place, that make it a choice that a not insignificant number of men will choose. And I think I'm interested in men in this space because men aren't bystanders to the problem. They're overwhelmingly the people who choose to use violence, but they're also the peers, the brothers, the faith leaders, the colleagues, and the community leaders who can either reinforce the conditions for violence on the one hand or challenge them on the other. And there's a whole spectrum in what that looks like. And so for me, you know, a lot of my work around prevention is not about reassuring men that they're the good guys, but into inviting them into a conversation around collective responsibility, so that women aren't carrying the burden of educating, forgiving, or managing us as men. And I say us as like John, myself, and all the participants on the call today that identify as men. And so I think prevention work, whether we're talking about culturally and racially marginalized communities or broader mainstream communities, has to go beyond awareness. Most men know that violence is wrong. The harder work, I think, is the prevention work of recognizing entitlement, control, minimizing sexist humor, victim blaming, silence, and then complicity before they become more apparent or visible forms of harm. So my work is a lot about meeting men where they are, but not leaving them there. It's very important to find men where they are, but then take them somewhere else. So connecting with them, but then helping to understand accountability. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea, and we're getting a chance to talk about, you know, for everyone on the call, what that can look like in practice as well later on.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Darren and Jun, for your introduction to really set the scene up for what this work can look like. I do want to move on now to unpacking some of the drivers of violence and intersectionality. One of the key drivers for the violence against women is gender inequality. Anu, what do you think? Do you agree that this holds true when working with culturally diverse communities? What are the drivers of violence against women in the context of working with culturally diverse men, for example?
Anaga, for that question. No, absolutely. I think I completely agree that gender inequality lays the land in which violence can thrive. And at its core, violence is about the exertion of power from one person to another. And power is exerted when you feel that you can control the other person, or you can coerce them to do what you want. It's that application of power that we are talking about. And gender is one of the greatest drivers of that power, the power that men feel they hold over women and others less powerful than them, I guess, at a very core level. And if you follow the Change the Story model, it outlines what the 4 pillars of drivers of violence against women are. It's not so different for multicultural communities or culturally and linguistically diverse communities. It just looks very different when we see from the outside. And often for the uninitiated, it's easier for us to attribute those differences to culture, but it's the expression of culture that you see in different ways. So for example, many communities that come here to Australia from other countries, they might have seen gender stereotyping done differently. They may see coming here to a more gender equal society as a challenge to their authority and their power. And that's why the violence continues. It might look different, but it definitely continues. The other, I think, key factor to keep in mind is that gender inequality and gender stereotyping do not thrive and flourish just because men are the ones holding up that pillar. It's because many women, also for the sake of security and other cultural factors, keep that system alive, and they bring those beliefs and values from their home countries into Australia. And that allows violence to thrive here as well. Very frequently in our assessment of risk of violence, we think culture is a great risk factor. But what we sometimes fail to unpack is how that culture is expressed within communities, both here and in their home countries, is a greater driver of violence. What culture feels like, what culture looks like, and what culture sounds like are often the key factors that we need to look at when you talk about intersectionality. And as practitioners, particularly prevention practitioners, we need to become familiar with that language so we can meet people where they're at. And I think I really liked what Taran said earlier, that you need to meet people where they're at, but you can't leave them there. If they're using culture as a crutch to excuse, rationalize, and explain their violence, we need to shake them out of that spot, get a little bit into that discomfort so we can move them away, because leaving them there is not an option. We can't leave people where they're at if it's going to make others in their sphere of influence unsafe. So yeah, gender inequality definitely sets the foundation, and culture is often used as an excuse.
Thanks, Anu. And Jun, would you have anything to add to this? How do factors like migration and racism affect the use of violence in culturally and linguistically diverse men?
Yeah, Jun speaking. So I guess I forgot to mention one thing that I've been working on is really trying to unpack a lot of this from an arts perspective or through storytelling. And one way that we explore, one form is through musical or basically creative storytelling. Just want to quickly share a discovery from that experience. Really is when we try. So okay, sorry, let me backstep. So the story is about two, I guess, migrant growing up with a certain belief system and how they navigate when they migrate to a new country, and migration comes into place, racism comes into place, and how that sort of impact or influence some of the decision making. In this particular story, it led to domestic violence. And the more we unpack this, the more we realize it is essentially a human story. It is a human nature for people to want to be respected, to want to have their dignity upheld. And when we come back, return to this whole migration and racism experience that they have, that oftentimes is where this very, very fundamental human desire was being stripped off or taken away. And then it's sort of, you can see them, how it's connected to some decisions that's not a good move, but then you can see how things link. So yeah, I guess that's really where my job or my mission really is to unpack this and put it out on stage in this particular case and have a discussion from that point onwards.
Yeah, that's really interesting because what you're describing there is how that intersection between migration and racism can have that connection to things like violence use. I might bring Tharang into this conversation too, if you had anything to add to this, as well as maybe give you a chance to tell us a little bit about what kind of barriers are there to working with men in this space generally, as well as men working with CALD men. I think we've already just mentioned in your intros how we have had quite a few questions about men justifying the use of violence due to cultural reasons. So what is your advice to practitioners who may be working with men who have this kind of mindset? Tharang, before you start, our audience has just mentioned they can't hear you that well. Do you mind just adjusting where your mic is positioned maybe? so we can hear you a
Is
bit
that
better.
for me?
Yeah, for you, Dara.
Hopefully that's a bit better now.
We'll keep talking, and I'll let you know if it's.
Hopefully it works okay. So yeah, in terms of, I suppose, barriers that arise with culturally and racially marginalized communities, CALD men, etc. There is, as Anu touched on, the reality that some men will use culture, religion, tradition, to justify their control or their use of violence. But it's imperative upon practitioners not to accept that framing at face value, to challenge that framing, and also to challenge that framing internally so that we don't inadvertently become people who collude with those who choose to use violence, because we are also products of the broader cultural and social environments, not only in which we were raised, but the ones in which we live now. And so it's really important to ask ourselves, as well as of others, help me understand what we mean by culture here, and then who benefits from that interpretation. And that allows us to get to the core of a lot of men's use of violence, which is patriarchal violence, misogynistic violence, anti-women, anti-female attitudes, and very rigid ideas on what being a man or being a boy actually means. And so it's very important that whenever culture is named as the cause of violence, that we are careful that violence is not caused by culture, and that harmful norms exist with any community, and patriarchy adapts to different cultural contexts. So patriarchy will use the culture, whether it's religious scripture or it's a holy book, whatever it is, it will use that or the interpretation of that to justify how women should occupy certain roles within society and men should be expected to occupy certain roles. And so it's really important as well, when we think about issues around migration and racism, that we understand and we acknowledge that, yes, they create stress, they create dislocation, loss of status, loss of financial and economic well-being, and certainly add to economic pressures for those who are already facing significant consequences of inequality and racialized inequality. And so we understand that they intensify the risk factors, but those experiences in and of themselves don't cause violence in a direct or deterministic way. There are many men, in fact, the majority of men who will experience racism and migration stress will not use that to then enact violence on the women, girls, or children in their lives. And so the key issue is in how we socialize men to respond to those pressures, how we encourage them to act when they do feel those pressures, and to identify that they're actually having those pressures, especially if they try to regain control or authority in the home. So for a lot of men who are racialized, they will not hold power within mainstream society. And that's where some of the conversations around male privilege are often lacking in terms of the experience of men of color, because a lot of them will go through life with economic inequality, not hold power, but they'll hear through, white liberal Western notions of gender equality that men are privileged and men have everything. And they'll look at the world and rightfully point out, I don't really have a lot. I work doubly hard to get half as much as the man next to me. And so there needs to be a much more intersectional approach in how we understand the men who use violence. And that's where we understand that migration, racism risks, and being from a culturally and racially marginalized community add pressures, but at no stage should they ever be allowed to excuse violence. So practitioners who work with men from these communities have a real challenge ahead of them, because it requires holding multiple truths, that racism matters, but it doesn't excuse violence. Because you experience racism outside of the home, it doesn't allow you to go home and enact violence or coercive controlling behaviors on the women, the children in your life. And so men will often use that culture. And I think one of the ways that we maybe shift those barriers, or that we challenge the barriers, is making sure that we involve trusted community voices, but always making sure that they are aligned with women's safety and not reinforcing patriarchal authority. So, for example, faith-based settings can be a great way to reach many men, but I've lost count of the number of faith-based seminars I've sat through where often the priest or the conduit to a higher power is giving the most patriarchal sort of interpretation or adaptation of something that is not meant to be read in that way whatsoever. And so they actually add on a whole bunch of misogynistic subtext, which then, for those who look at those people as trusted figures, will then take home. And it's those sorts of cultural attitudes that then allow for some people to think that violence is an acceptable response, because the person that they trust most, or the figures they trust most, are giving them patriarchal readings of it. So it's really important that we are challenging patriarchal attitudes at every possibility.
Thanks, Darren. And I think that's a really interesting point about holding multiple truths, and that makes this conversation particularly hard, working across intersectionality and having those spaces where men can talk about this in an open way. Anu, I thought, I saw you nodding away. Do you have anything else you want to add to in terms of the barriers and the intersectionality conversation?
Absolutely. And I think one of the things, thank you, Tarang, for that. I think that was just beautifully unpacked. We see a lot of barriers, but there are also opportunities for us to engage. They're not barriers that we stop and say, too hard, let's go back home. But there are opportunities for us to exchange, to actually have some of these very meaningful conversations. And one of the things that strikes me about prevention work is that, unlike the MBCP and other settings I've worked in previously, it's actually about sitting down with people and having those deeper conversations and being open for us to be challenged and for us to challenge from a place of curiosity, not judgment. One of the biggest challenges as a worker working with people with different cultures is that sometimes you're actually worried that you might come across as racist, or that you might be engaging in a stereotype, or your biases might be coming out. But approaching this with genuine curiosity and openness and being willing to debate your point of view, I think opens a lot more doors. Some of the work that I've done, and June earlier spoke about the leadership course that we've had running at AIMS since 2017, where we've actually sat down with cohort after cohort of people from diverse cultural backgrounds and had these discussions about what does culture look like, what is actually culture. We're using culture as a crutch to explain violence. We're using culture as a reason for why we are, perpetuating patriarchal myths. But what are those cultural values? They're the culture is shaped by our values and beliefs. How we practice is what culture. What you see on the outside is actually culture. But if you go back to the basics, it's the values that we all hold dear. And these are universal values. I mean, if you picked any three people from across the street when you're walking down Flinders Street, they'll be like, my core values are respect, trust, I want to be safe, I want to be loved. Engaging people in those conversations about, okay, trust is a core value, safety is a core value. What does that look like for you? Is that for your partner to feel scared when you walk in through the door? Or is it for her to turn around to you and ask you to take out the rubbish, even though you've just had a long day at work? What does safety look like for you? And if you genuinely want your partner to trust you and you trust your partner, is that trust expressed by constantly checking her messages or not worrying if she's out late? What does trust actually look like for you? And these are deep introspective questions which people need to sit with. And as prevention practitioners, we are not looking for an end or an outcome at the end of that conversation. We are looking for people to open their own Pandora's boxes and have those deep conversations with themselves in safety and without judgment. Because the minute judgment comes in, we know that people get defensive. And if we're looking for long-term change, we need to sit with discomfort, and we need to be comfortable with other people sitting in discomfort as well. It is a slow boil. It's not going to happen overnight. And one of the challenges, I guess, in this instant gratification society is we're expecting people to fall into our way of thinking straight away, whereas the messaging needs to be very nuanced. If we are genuinely respectful of everybody's culture, that needs to show up in the way we do our work as well. Yeah. And one of the big conversations I have with a lot of practitioners is that, how are we supposed to know everybody's culture? It's very different to ours. But bringing it back to those core cultural values and having discussions about the expression of that culture in today's context. If something made sense 100 years ago in some other geography, is that still relevant now? And is that value you want to keep going, or that practice which has no longer got any meaning today? And yep, it takes time and it takes a lot of effort, but prevention is a long-term game. But yeah,
Thank you.
I think that's probably where I'd stop for now.
Thanks, Anu. That's given us a really great, I think it was really great how you combined the common challenges with the kind of opportunities and solutions that what that might look like when you're directly working with men from CALD communities. I want to shift it away a little bit, but still relevant to this topic, because we can't really have a webinar on this topic without talking about the role of misogynistic content online, like the manosphere, and how that's impacting young people. So how does working with engaging young people look like, especially in this new age and this context? Tarang, I might ask you to start, given your background in this topic.
Sure. I think Anu raised a really good point when she spoke to the things that may have worked 100 years ago in terms of attitudes or the way that society was structured, and does it work now? Obviously the manosphere, we can't go a day without seeing a new story, either here in Australia or somewhere internationally, about one of the sort of effects of it, or one of the latest characters, or another think piece on it, or another documentary. And a lot of the conversation focuses in the mainstream about boys needing role models, or young men not having positive male role models. And on the one hand, I think it's very important to acknowledge that may be true, that boys are lacking in role models. But the flip side for women and gender diverse folk, or people from queer communities, is that they haven't always had role models in the public sphere, in the limelight, to model their behavior of. And yet they have not been drawn to, as communities, to enact the levels of physical violence or coercive control unto others that men have as a collective. And so the idea that simply giving men good role models as an antidote to the manosphere is a good intent but misdirected. Because at the moment, younger men are encountering misogyny whether they go looking for it or not. They get it through humor, through memes, through podcasts, through gaming spaces, and algorithms that are designed to push forward more and more increasingly misogynistic, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, and often racist tropes and ideologies. And they're getting this at an age of 6, 8, 10, 12 years old, where they see the issue before they even have a language to name it or identify what it is. So they might know that, this is wrong, but they don't know why it is, because they wouldn't be able to articulate what's actually going on in the content that they are consuming. And I think one of the things that makes it so successful is that it gives boys and young men extremely simple explanations for complex feelings. And if we take into account a broader historical view of how boys and men are socialized to reject emotional security, to reject emotional introspection, they're often socialized to not understand feelings of loneliness, rejection, shame, confusion, insecurity. And the manosphere grifters are giving them the most concrete, fixed binary outlook on what they are seeing and why it works. And so, for example, they feel, this is boys and young men, that they don't have life opportunities, that they'll never buy a home, or they'll never succeed in life. And they often give boys the answer that it's feminism or women or certain racial minority groups that are to blame. And overwhelmingly, that's never the case. And so they get very close to identifying the real problem, which might be wealth inequality, but then they blame women as opposed to blaming the billionaires who take from the everyday working people. And so it's a very convenient script. And I think what we have to acknowledge is that the work as practitioners to engage boys in this space is to help them identify those feelings of loneliness, rejection, insecurity, shame, and confusion. And at the same time, build a degree of media literacy and emotional literacy and critical thinking that goes beyond respect women messaging. It is, you know, as we've seen with Hollywood celebrities, it's perfectly capable for men to understand that they need to respect women on a broad sense, but then not engage in behaviors that actually display that respect and value women. So, for example, a few years ago, there was a Hollywood celebrity who was weaponizing therapy speak in terms of setting boundaries in a relationship. But everything that was him setting a so-called boundary was actually enacting coercive control on what another partner, what his partner, sorry, could do or not do in terms of her relationships with her female friends. And so it's really important that we approach boys and young men around the manosphere with work that with practice that does challenge entrenched beliefs about authority, about relationships, about control, and about gender and power. And so the entry point to how we approach it is always different. You know, it could be through sport, through community, through faith, through other online avenues. But it really has to be grounded in that lens of gender and power, and not simply on just well-being. It can't just be a proposition to make men feel better. It has to be a proposition that ultimately has measurable outcomes in safety for women, girls, and children.
Thank you so much, Thar. It's given us a little bit of an insight about what is the manosphere and how it influences young people, and how that might change how we have to engage them as well. John, you work with young people in your work as well. Do you have anything to add about engaging young people and young men from CALD backgrounds in this space?
Can I just start off by saying, Taran, that was mind-blowingly informative. I'm still like digesting everything you shared. That was really good. From my end, I mean, I have to acknowledge I was looking at the question and thinking more from the role model perspective, and I guess with some of my interaction with young people from my cultural background, I'm from Malaysia. I'm a Chinese Malaysian, and seeing, I guess one of the way to really I guess understand what sort of way to engage with young people when it comes to role model. I have been exploring pop culture. I've been exploring like anime. There are some characters. I mean, they're all, not all of them are perfect, but some of them, they do comes with, I guess, good characteristics, like kindness or loving and trying to, and sacrificial. So I've came across a couple that I'm not sure how many of your audience will know, but I guess Tanjiro Kamado from Demon Slayer expressed like kindness and love, and Prince Zuko from Avatar, who went through a journey himself from, you know, being angry and all that, to somehow unlearning prejudice and learning how to be a better person, more responsible in his actions. Because these are some of the pathway that I've been exploring on how to start a conversation before we go into a deeper discussion into this topic.
Yeah, that's really good that you're bringing in pop culture and how they can be good examples that you can weave into your work in prevention as well. We might move on soon to respectful conversations, but Anu, I just wanted to ask you, how does working with older men differ perhaps to working with younger men in terms of their influences on attitudes and behaviors, specifically in that CALD context?
Thank you for that. And again, like June, I found that exposition from Taran very insightful, especially bringing, I think, how it's portrayed in the media and the narrative that people can latch on to. One of the things that we see in our work, both in intervention, response, and in prevention, is that Australia is a multicultural country with waves and waves of migration. And if you think about the migration, perhaps 20, 30, 40 years ago, a lot of the people who came in were skilled migrants, came from countries where perhaps they had more patriarchal systems. They've come here, they've started to kind of fall in with the rise of gender equality and the awareness of gender equality here in Australia. The conflict then comes with sharing of power, where they physically feel like they're losing some of their influence, their authority, because they've had to share what they have with others. And a lot of things that you'll hear about from that generation is that they've lost out on opportunities because it went to a female candidate. They'll talk about affirmative action and the fact that many organizations now have quotas or policies in place to promote women, and they feel like they're missing out. And that's a lot of angst from that generation of men. But if you look at the current crop of younger men, they've grown up in a gender equal world. They've grown up with the concepts of gender equality and the reasons why it is so important. So you think they're already on board because it's been hooked into them from the time that they've been quite young. But the narrative that they've been hearing is that they're never going to get opportunities because women are going to take it all. So it's not the fact that they've got to share their opportunity, share their power, share resources. It's the angst of lost opportunity, what they could have been. And it's a narrative that you see playing out all around us. People complain, and Tarang spoke about the fact that, now every single problem you've got someone else to blame. There isn't enough houses. Oh, it's the migrants. There isn't enough jobs. Oh, it's because women are getting all the jobs. But it's not really that, is it? It's not that every person, every young man who's complaining that a woman's taken his job. Which job is he talking about? Is he talking about the entry-level jobs? Is he talking about the skilled jobs? Are they even trying the same things? So a lot of the global angst is getting caught up in that very seductive narrative in the media that women, gender equity, all of the other things that people are worried about, the culture wars, the identity politics in the US, it makes for a very attractive narrative for people who need someone to blame. And the person that's in front of them, perhaps their partner or their sister, is the one that's the physical evidence of everything that's wrong in their lives. But I might stop there because I know you had another question, Anaga.
Yes, you can see me like moving around a bit.
Yeah.
It's because we're getting, I would like to move towards some of the practical and conversations that you can actually have with people from CALD communities. We've spoken quite a bit about unpacking gender inequality and how that looks like in the broader context, but now a lot of us practitioners who are here want to know what they can do differently when they're working directly with their clients. One of the things that has come up is, in the question box has been around what are we talking about specifically when we're talking about violence. Anu, I know I'll keep a spotlight on you for another minute because you discussed a little bit about the language that we use and what violence might mean to people from different cultural backgrounds. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. And I think it's really important for us as practitioners to be aware that even if we are speaking the same language, what we are understanding could be two very different things. The concepts of safety, the concepts of violence, the concept of control mean different things to people from different cultures, and they also mean different things in different languages. We know that in many languages, there is no term for coercion. There is no term for force. It's expressed as a feeling, not as an action. So when we are trying to talk to people from different communities, we need to understand if we are all actually singing off the same songbook. We might think that they're really good with English, maybe we have an interpreter, but unless we understand the nuance of what they mean, our work is probably going to leave some gaping holes in there. Language barriers, I think, is one of the biggest ones in this work, both in intervention as well, and definitely in prevention, because prevention is very conceptual. People need to understand what it looks like, feels like, and sounds like for them to be on board and to actually apply it in their practice. We're asking people to come on a journey with us. So if we're not speaking the same language, that's going to be a challenge from day dot. The language of safety, the language of equality, the language of respect, to know what that looks like for other people is really important for practitioners to understand. As a simple example, we talk about respecting women. And for us, it means that we are giving them an equal opportunity. We are treating them as equals. We are listening to them. But perhaps for somebody from another culture, respect is actually making sure that they never encounter any challenges, that we are problem solving for them, that we are protecting them. And that's how I'm showing my respect, by not allowing them to encounter any kind of discomfort. And if that's the point where we are coming from, then I could be talking about respect in my sense of the world all day long. And that person's like, but I'm already doing all of that. I'm already respecting my partner, my sister, my mom. What does safety look like? Safety for us in a Western concept is that I should be able to go about my normal business without being worried about anything untoward happening to me. But safety from someone who comes from a trauma background or a war background could be that the house has locks and the woman cannot be, done anything to, because they're safe at home. So that's what safety looks like for that person. So again, we could be speaking about the same thing, but we could be understanding very different things. And these things come out when we're ready to have those conversations, rather than assuming that they know exactly what we are talking about, asking them the questions. What does safety look like for you? What does respect sound like for you? What does equity look like for you?
Thank you, Anu. I think that's a really great example about how language barriers can impact prevention work. I want to move to Tarang now, because you've already spoken about this a bit. I wanted to know if you want to add anything further about how we can have conversations that are both culturally responsive, but also not lose sight of accountability and gendered power.
Yeah, I think we have to be, I suppose, just adding to what I was saying before, really careful not to pathologize culture, migration, or religion, and just acknowledge that patriarchy and misogynistic attitudes exist across all communities and across all ethnic and cultural groups. And I suppose, in terms of practice, understanding that cultural responsiveness doesn't mean we have to have cultural relativism. Like, we can understand someone's context without excusing harm. So in practice, we can respect people's identity and their dignity, particularly those who choose to use violence, but stay firm on women's and children's safety. So the experiences of fear that they instill in their family, or the acts of coercive control that they engage in, are inexcusable, even if they don't necessarily have, as Anu touched on, the framework around language. Even if they don't have the words to describe these actions, we can speak to the values or feelings base that they will understand. That, for example, they will know an experience of fear or shame or rejection or isolation or loneliness, even if they don't have the words for it. And so our task as practitioners is to help them understand that in terms of how we then engage in prevention that's culturally responsive, but doesn't lose sight of accountability for women and children's safety.
Thanks, Darren. And I think what would be really great now is to talk a little bit about how do we actually create an environment where people feel safe enough to speak honestly about their experiences of this topic. I know you mentioned we need to get to a point where they feel safe to be honest. So tell us a little bit about that. Maybe I'll start with you, Jun. Given your work in the creative space, how do you create that safety when you start engaging with men from CALD communities? What tactics do you use?
Speaking, I guess, just acknowledging that the men or the boys that I've been working with are mostly in the prevention space. And so one way to do so really is to, through storytelling is a way to let them feel like they're seen, they're heard, without or less directly feeling like they're being judged. And once they feel like, that's a story that they can resonate, they can relate to, a lot of time that barrier is already partially gone. They're more willing to engage or share. So I guess, that's where storytelling or seeing someone else's journey happening in front of you can have some magical moment, especially when you can relate or resonate with that. And I guess another way for them to feel like they can trust you is understanding their language, or understanding, in this case, their culture. It doesn't necessarily be like ethnic based culture, but just the trend, the culture, the vocab that they use. I brought in a few comic reference, but once again, that's also something that's quite useful. And the reason why I felt that's useful is because I recently went to Taiwan and had a chat with the Taiwanese group that have, I guess, groups for young people, young men and boys, to just come in and share about their experience and navigating challenges. And one way they use to, as a conversation starter, really is through card games that have comics and illustrations that they already buy in. Like, yep, that's very me. Let's continue this conversation. So yeah, not different tools that could work from my perspective.
That's a really great point you make about making the space feel relatable and catching on to the kind of things that they already feel comfortable talking about, and then using that as an opportunity to have more deeper conversations. Tarang, I wanted to thank you first for sharing your lived experience to the panel and to the audience. Can you tell us a bit about how do you weave in lived experience carefully in this space, in this prevention space?
Yeah, I think look, it's tricky, you know, and I think I've acknowledged at the outset that it's tricky. I also sometimes, and thank you, Annika, for the way that you asked the question as well. I sometimes struggle with the way that we talk about this issue broadly, and the reason is that people will often say to me, "Oh, you know, I know your story, I know your sister's story." But the reality, when they're saying what they're really saying, is that I know that your sister was murdered, right? Nikki's story is one of the first Australian-born child of migrant parents, because when my parents migrated to Australia, I was an infant in their arms. So that it was Nikki's birth that really planted roots in Australia and made Melbourne start to feel like home. And so it's a tricky one. I don't have the solution on how we speak about this, but when it comes to men's violence, it is a very difficult, sensitive topic to broach. It is someone's story, but to call it a story feels insufficient. But I use the experiences of what Nikki endured to help humanize the issue, not to make it about tragedy, because people's lived experiences and their expertise is powerful. But I think at the same time, drawing from experience, having worked across multiple government survivor advocacy councils and other settings, it must be connected to evidence, to systems, and to prevention work. Otherwise, it risks becoming emotional testimony. And there is space for story sharing, and there is a space for understanding, you know, the experiences of primarily women and then also children in their own right as victim survivors. But we can't allow that to substitute for informing evidence and systems around prevention work. So I think from my perspective, it's something that I'm always juggling. I'm very careful and hopefully direct enough in saying that we can't make women's suffering the only way that men learn empathy. The idea that men need a personal connection to care. So, for example, when we see politicians or policymakers say, "Oh, I had a daughter and then I understood," it's no, women and girls in their own right should have all the dignity afforded to boys and men. And so one of the things I will say that I think is really important when it comes to lived experience is there's a myth that engaging men means making the conversation softer. So ensuring that they have a personal connection to the work, a sister or a mother or a cousin or a friend. I don't think that's true. I think that the way we engage men and the way we honor lived experience is make the conversation more honest, more practical, and harder to avoid. So, for example, men can and should care because of the women in their lives, but understand that if the women in their lives represent, you know, the 1 in 3 that are impacted by this, then imagine just how many women in the broader community are impacted. You know, when they walk through this, you know, if they visit the city of Sydney or the city of Melbourne and they walk through the street, if we go, or you go to a large shopping complex and you look around, just think of the sheer number of women who would be impacted. and the sheer number of men in their lives who use coercive controlling or diminishing behaviors towards women. And I think that's a much more powerful way to honor lived experience than simply just go, well, of course you should care because you have a daughter now, or of course you should care because you two were raised by a mother. That's the lowest bar for human behavior. And I think that in that way, we've probably let men get off the hook in terms of behavior and accountability for a very long time.
Thanks, Tarang. We're getting close to the end of today's webinar. I did want to weave in a question that's come in from the audience, as well as one that we already had in mind for you, Anu, which was people are quite curious about the cultural values, and you spoke about how, you know, going back to the real values way of working in this space. What do you have, any final advice in about 2 minutes you can give to practitioners who may want to do similar work to your work at AIMS? What advice do you have?
No, absolutely. I think completely agree that we shouldn't only care if we've got skin in the game, just because we've got a woman in the family or women in our circle of influence. That's not the reason we should care. We should care because it's important, it's essential, and it's human. It's a human value to care for others. The values-based work, I think, for us here at AIMS is really, really important, because if we're looking for long-term, sustained, replicable change, it has to be anchored in core values, and the core values of safety, respect, and equity, I think, to start with. One of the challenges that I see, and one of the questions you had asked earlier, was how do we create an atmosphere of safety? I think lack of judgment, being genuinely curious, not inquisitive, but curious, and parking judgment at the door. We are living now in a world where it is much more acceptable and in fact expected that a person can be angry and violent without anybody criticizing. But we are judging people for having human values of vulnerability, of kindness. We actually talk about it as if it's unusual. It shouldn't be. Sadness, despair, vulnerability are all parts of our human experience, but we somehow don't make it attractive for particularly men to engage in those emotions. So we need to create safety around that and show that anger and violence are actually antithetical to some of the core human values. To answer the question about how can other people, other organizations that want to do this work actually go about it, is genuinely look at their internal policies and procedures to see if they are parking their judgment at the door. Are we expecting people to come on board and immediately have an evolution and a change and disbelieve everything they've believed in the past? Probably not. But we need to open the conversations and be willing to invest that time. This is slow work. It's not work that can be done quickly, and we need to take people along for the journey, I think. That's the one point I'd keep repeating, that we go where people are at and we walk on that runway with them, however long it is. It's not a helicopter ready for takeoff. It's definitely a 380, which requires a multi-mile runway.
Thank you so much, Anu. And that's a great way, I think, to summarize today's conversation. We've taken a journey from unpacking the drivers, talked about intersectionality, and also what the work can practically look like. So I really wanted to thank all of your time today, all of our panelists online, to be sharing so honestly and genuinely your experiences in this space. It's such an important conversation to have. I also wanted to just say a big thank you to our audience who is joining us online in submitting some amazing questions. Sorry we didn't get a chance to get to all of them. And also our AIFS comms team and the Child and Family Evidence and Evaluation team, who are working hard on the background, making these webinars possible. Please do subscribe to our AIFS newsletter to be notified when this webinar will be available to watch. And please do take the time to answer some survey questions, the feedback survey. We really do appreciate your feedback and use that feedback to shape our webinars. We have another webinar coming up on Thursday, the 25th of June on strengthening support for LGBTI LGBTQ plus young people with disabilities, and that's held in partnership with Emerging Minds. And I just want to do a final shout out. There is early bird registrations are still available for the aifs conference. It's going to be taking place in Melbourne on the 9th to the 11th of September. So we'd really like to see you there. We plan to bring together government, practitioners and researchers to explore how best to support families. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you again very soon. We had a few extra questions we wanted to run through that were quite interesting. So one of the questions was a little bit practical in a sense. They wanted to know, how do we get men to come and actually attend sessions on the prevention of violence against women? Any ideas on this one? I might start with you, Dara.
Yeah, thank you, Annika. I think it's sort of one of the age-old questions, and it's certainly one of the more prevalent questions now, because we are seeing a growing appetite among groups of men, and certainly there's a push from government to see how we can engage men in the solution to the prevention of men's violence against women. I think there are a few different strategies. One, in order to have men wanting to engage, leading only with violence against women can sometimes have the opposite effect of getting men along, particularly if that group is not already engaged. So sometimes finding other ways to engage, whether it's through relationships, through leadership, through fatherhood, through workplace culture, is a really strong way to get people and men in particular to engage, through ideas of respect, or even through being a better mate or being a better friend. But it must, at the same time, connect clearly to prevention. So use trusted messengers. Men are more likely to attend when the invitation comes through a workplace, a club, a faith group, or a setting, or from a leader or a coach or peer that they already have an affinity to or a respect for. So using affinity bias actually as almost a Trojan horse to get through to the prevention messaging. Making the session practical, I think, is really important, and not moralizing, so that men feel that they are able to attend, instead of coming to learn why men are the problem. At the same time, with all that I've said, we have to be honest about the purpose. We are not here to trick men into attending, but we can't make it sound like it's a public shaming exercise, or at the same time it's just a session on leadership or just a session on fatherhood. Ultimately, this is a session on the prevention of violence against women and children, and specifically a form of violence, which is men's violence, use of coercive controlling behaviours, etc. And so it's really important that we frame it as an opportunity to build the skills to have those difficult conversations. I think there is a myth that if we have difficult conversations, men will shut off. I don't think that's the case. I think if we have difficult conversations with honesty and offer pragmatic solutions, many men actually, instead of feeling judged, exposed, or lectured, will want to be involved. And I think also giving men a reason to care beyond personal virtue. So it's part of their role as being a good father. It's part of their role of being a good partner or a good friend or a colleague or a leader, or just being part of broader Australian society, particularly for recent migrant groups, educating and understanding that it's part of being a good functioning member of society, in spite of any issues you might experience around racism or dislocation and other issues. Being a respectful member of society involves treating women and girls in the home and outside with equality and respect. So I think it's a balancing act of making sure that we use the avenues that attract men to get them in the room, but we never excuse or remove gendered power, entitlement, and accountability from the prevention work. Because ultimately, if we make it so palatable that we don't talk about those issues, then we're not really doing prevention work at the end. We're just getting men into a room and actually giving them an avenue to, explain grievance or to share their frustrations, and we're not actually combating any patriarchal messaging.
That's a really interesting point about getting that balance right. that idea of like using indirect approaches actually did come up in the research as well. Or how do you like start bringing them into conversation, often framing it like healthy relationships or something else as a more palatable way, like you described. Anna, would you like to add any other examples of how you can bring people into this space?
No, thank you. I think Tarun covered quite a lot of that initial safety and engagement, I guess, is a core feature here. One of the things that we found in our work is that rather than expecting men to come when we want them to come, for us to actually be open and proactive in going to spaces where men already are and where they feel the engagement is safe. So the settings that in sports, especially young people's sport, is really important to start introducing the messages of safety, respect, and gender equity into those spaces, university spaces, where safety is a big issue. Workplace is definitely a huge one. One of the things that we forget is that universities are also workplaces. While they're also teaching the next generation of preparing people for the future, they're also large workspaces. So having the conversations around gender equity, around safety, around respect in all of these platforms is really, really important. The other, I think the initial question was, how do you attract men to come to these sessions? I think before that, there is a big step on normalizing the message of prevention. You know, how we have, like I said earlier in the webinar, we've actually treated prevention of violence as a public health issue. And in public health, we speak about prevention extensively, whether it's heart disease, lung cancer, and all the other things. Australia has done a really good job of highlighting safety. And I think that's what needs to happen. We need to have a conversation about safety in our communities, in our families, generally, so we can actually motivate people to attend when we want to speak to them particularly. But going where people are already at is usually an excellent way of engaging.
Thank you, Anu. Jun, you actually were engaged in the program yourself. Tell us about how that worked out for you and what worked for you.
Yeah, Jun speaking. I think I just want to resonate what Tarang said. And once he said it, I realized that's also why I went to that course, is because it was, yes, there's a name, Violence Against Women Prevention, but there is that leadership course that really attracted me. So just reflecting on that journey, I felt like, yeah, the way it's being, that particular word does resonate with me. And also, as that time I was fairly a new migrant in Melbourne, and knowing that it's an opportunity to meet other people from multicultural background attracted me as well. Now that I think back, and so part of me was just trying to go there and meet friends that are outside of my circle of friends from diverse backgrounds. So once again, just resonating with what Tarang shared.
Thank you so much for all your great contributions, because that's quite a practical thing that people want to know where to start. One of the other practitioners online asked, can I ask if practitioners need to be male or from the same culture to be engaging men within these communities? Anu, I might start with you.
Thank you. That actually makes me think about the 4 gender drivers of violence and the 4 pillars that we have in the Change the Story model, is that people are most likely to be influenced by others who they consider their peers. And I guess the question is, do men listen to others who they think are the same as them? They respect them the same. So like, is it other men or is it people from the same cultural background? I don't think it hurts, but I think what really helps is for practitioners to be genuinely open and curious and to park judgment at the door. As I said before, having men talk about this issue is really important for the sector in general, because it is not just a woman's problem on their safety, it's for us to have everyone to be equally safe. And I've read so much literature on the fact that gender stereotyping is as bad for men as it is for women. And we know that a lot of men's mental health and other issues are connected to the impact of gender stereotyping, and that we've kind of internalized in our cultures. So I think it is really important for men to share in that message and to invite other people to come in, other men to come in and listen to that. The culture question is a little bit problematic because sometimes it can almost seem like colluding, like I know your culture, so yep, let's go off and do this work. Being respectful to everybody's culture should be the foundation piece in all of our work. And you should be agnostic to that. You shouldn't need to be from the same culture for you to understand where the other person is coming from. But I do agree with the first part that we do need to have men represented in this work a lot more. Karan, what do you think?
I just, I'm so moved by what you said. I know I couldn't agree more. I think that representation matters, as you point out, but again, at the end of the day, representation is not enough. I think the question has to be, does the practitioner share a background? Not just does the practitioner share a background with the men, but does the practitioner have the capacity, the ability, and the curiosity, to hold cultural nuance but gendered accountability at the same time. That's really at the core of this. I think one of the things that happens is that there's an expectation that men from culturally diverse communities will automatically understand the men from culturally diverse communities better. But it doesn't make someone culturally safe, or prevention literate automatically. They can still reproduce patriarchal ideas. They can still minimize harm to women and girls and over-identify with men's discomfort. And that's something that, Anu has shared before in so many occasions about men's behavior change. But in prevention, that also happens. We use the same affinity with men from different cultural and ethnic groups to over-identify with men's discomfort rather than center the lens on prevention, which has an accountability piece and is much more uncomfortable for men collectively because they have to identify that they may have even unwittingly benefited from the subjugation of women and girls. Despite having so many things going against them, they still, culture is being used as a shield for control or violence. And I think it's a really fine balancing act. And so I appreciate the person asking the question because I think it's a question that displays curiosity and good nature. And also, I think course corrects a little bit. There is sometimes a fear in some of our progressive spaces about saying the wrong thing or offending. And so what we'll do is we will self-censor. So you'll have people from particular backgrounds who say, oh, I can't work with so-and-so because they're from a different background. I don't agree with that proposition. That's my personal opinion. I think it's much more important, following on from what Anu said, that representation is significant and it matters, but it's not the only consideration. There needs to be a consideration about whether those who engage in prevention have both cultural knowledge, gender analysis, and family violence expertise, and accountability to women's safety. Just having a cultural affinity or a gender affinity is not sufficient, I think.
I think that's really interesting. It requires quite a bit of skill to get that balance right and be culturally curious, but hold people accountable. I think it's a journey that a lot of the audience is interested in taking. And so thank you so much for spending this time unpacking a couple more extra questions. And we hope to see you again in one of our webinars.